Fire Mountain Aria, written and narrated by Jill Penrod. Chapter 11. Trace hadn't slept well, and he was now wide awake, hundreds of randoms before morning. Hating to lie in bed, he moved to the living area and smiled at the fishbowl on the table in front of the sofa. It looked like an ordinary fish, not something whose origins might be another realm. Unlike the sea monsters, he felt nothing from the fish but a static living energy, the kind he felt from all other animals. After 2 randoms of watching the fish swim, he returned to his room and pulled out a new sketchbook. Maybe if he didn't use a book filled with painful memories, he could quench this need to draw without gutting himself in the process. He started with the fish, which didn't look like something from another realm. Still, it tickled him to know he might be the first person on Portomare to create an image of this fish. Once he drew it to his satisfaction, he drew one of the eels, the long, sinewy body with strange glowing tentacles. He thought he captured its wide eyes and flat mouth, and again, this almost had to be other realm. Katie said she'd searched several databases and couldn't find it. His dad would love the discoveries. So would his Uncle Alexander, his dad's brother. Rachel wouldn't care. She was a teenager, not sure she wanted to be in the family business. She wanted friends, someone to talk about boys with her, someone interested in gossip and not village repairs and sun recharges. Closing his eyes, he let the moment pass. Was it wrong to keep the truth about Rachel to himself? If Trace told Echo, she would ache just like he ached. No, he couldn't do that to her. His mother would love that he could feel with the creatures, that he'd rescued some of the offspring. "I don't know if I can do this, Echo," he whispered, touching the little tentacles he'd drawn. "I used to love this. I used to love reefs. Now I love dangerous mysteries. I'm not sure this is forward motion. I don't like this guy I've turned into, and I know he drives you crazy, but I don't know how to banish him." Dropping the notebook on the sofa, he wandered to the deck and looked at Echo's data and notes. He smiled at the organization. Echo was always organized. Trace knew he was smart, but he wasn't neat. His thoughts were seldom neat either, connections coming wildly and randomly. Echo had always helped him sort his thoughts so they made sense. Together, they made a good team. Which made him think of Dayton, a man who could disrupt that team. But it would happen eventually. Echo was beautiful and kind, and she deserved a man who loved her. He couldn't ever get in the way of that. And him? He'd considered having a family, but he never fit. Too arrogant, too strong, too smart. No, he would continue what he and his family had begun, roaming the waters to aid those in need. And if Echo found the life she wanted, the life she deserved, he would do it alone. Echo planned to look for a singer with a talent for writing songs, to help here on Tormendu, and as Trace looked at her notes about that, a wash of arrogance hit, something from his old self. He wasn't naturally talented at creating songs. The notes didn't flow into his head without thought the way they did for some. But he had been taught how to build a song. He'd been taught how to test them, how to structure them. He didn't have a natural talent for writing, but he did have a natural talent for thinking. If he set his mind to it, he could create a song to get through the rock. This would require trial and error, so he pulled a small dark rock panel from the supply room and snagged a few of the unknown stones from one of the bags Dayton had filled. Then he jumped the skipper lower on the reef, so it hovered outside an area somewhat level with the floor of the reef. He hoped he was above the floor and not below it, but to be safe, he raised the skipper. Better too high than too low. With this done, he settled himself in the most comfortable chair in the ship and placed the panel in his lap. This would take time. On a whim, he gave himself a shot of Leichnick, because trial and error in this situation might mean a few scrapes off the rock, and he needed to head off pain and damage. He was smart, but he also knew this wouldn't go quickly. He needed to be able to work for hundreds of randoms in peace, and fortunately, he had time before Echo would find him. She would disapprove. Right now, his goal was a simple search song. He knew the normal search song, and he knew the search song variation to play through Dark Rock. He played both of those, hearing the difference, trying to determine what each note in the song accomplished. When he decided he knew the exact note denoting the Dark Rock, he played with other notes to see if any would penetrate the unknown stone. By aiming his focus at such small chunks of rock, he thought he could reduce any damage to himself if he failed. But even a gentle touch of a tiny piece painfully scraped his focus. He opened his eyes and put his hand to his forehead. No physical damage yet, and the focal was little enough that the Leichnick would fix it. But that didn't mean it didn't hurt. Having his endeavors hurt made him angry. He played around with more combinations, finally hitting a few that caused physical injury, and he wiped a trickle of blood off his forehead, each failure sparking more anger, more determination, and a little more recklessness. He could do this. He'd been called the strongest singer of the realm a time or two in school, and it was time to prove it. People were counting on him, and it was time he successfully saved someone. He would save their home. Both the other realmers and the Tormendu would end up with safe, warm, bright, viable homes, whatever the cost. He took a deep breath and reined in the thoughts. Echo didn't need him to die over this. He'd hurt his sister enough with his brooding and his moodiness. He counted on her to pave the way when dealing with people and to support him when he went astray. It was time to give something back to her, back to the world. It was time for the little brother to grow up and make things right. He had to settle himself and think logically here. After a few more attempts, he knew what he had wrong. He needed to approach the rock slowly. This had to do with speed and the angle at which he hit. In his late teens, he'd spent 3 cycles wandering, learning a few forbidden songs from old reclusive singers. Some of them caused physical injury to an enemy, and one in particular punched through a small area with a strong jolt of power. For his next try, he used notes from that song. His focus touched the rock gently and then tore through. Even better, it didn't hurt, and he felt something on the other side of the tiny chunk of stone. "Well," he muttered, holding the little rock in his hand, "this is all well and good with a tiny scrap of you. Now let's see what happens if I take it to a whole sheet of you." This was where it could get dangerous, and he stared at the sensors a long time. The rock wasn't thick here. He had to push his focus through a normal reef wall, punch through a narrow band of the other stone, and then search the other side. He doubted his search would go far, not with the power required to punch through, but it would be something. Enough to jump through at some point? He didn't know. He wasn't there yet. But definitely enough to feel something, to know if he was on the right track or not. He debated waking Echo and asking her to sit in on this. She would be hurt if he made this discovery without her. But she had also gone to bed with a warped focus, and she needed sleep. Nothing healed eldsingers like sleep. If he woke her to watch him fail, she wouldn't thank him. But if he got hurt doing this alone, she also wouldn't thank him. He played the new search song again, making sure he knew the notes, although if he did have an extra singing talent, it would be the ability to remember a song. Rarely did he have to hear a song twice to remember it. He played it perfectly 3 times, and then he took a very deep breath and told himself he would simply play toward the reef. The goal wasn't to penetrate the rock with the search. No, he would touch it, just skim it, and see what happened. Nothing happened. He skimmed it without pain, without resistance, so he played the song again, this time penetrating less than 1/4 of the full thickness of the rock. Again, nothing bad happened. His focus moved easily and painlessly through the stone, and he brought it back and waited. No apparent warping, no delayed reactions. He felt completely fine. With renewed confidence, more than he'd felt since the Bougainville disaster, he started the song again, this time planning to send his focus clear through the rock and search as far as he could search. He'd developed a new song, and he'd done it quickly. He might have found part of the solution to a problem, something he hadn't done in a long time. With a grin, he let the notes play. After he breached the stone barrier, he could move more quickly, and he sent his focus far, hoping to feel something alive or something to give him a clue where he might find people. What he encountered surprised him, because it felt like water. He shifted to move his perception above it, and it had a strange drag. Ice? Yes, he'd brought up ice, so this must be what it felt like to search through ice, which was rare in his world. Reefs never had cold weather, and villas were too far below the surface to experience it. He knew ice existed naturally on the surface, but he'd never seen it. And yet now he skimmed over it, surprised at how large this sheet of ice was. He turned to scan the other direction, and the drag became different. He thought he'd found the edge of a lake or river, simple plants and rocks along the shore. He swept past it, moving quickly this time to get a big picture of the surroundings, and then he shot back toward the ice, surprised when he felt something heavy and likely man-made. A house, maybe. A boat? Something was near the edge, but lodged in the ice. With a passing thought of privacy, he sent his focus into the house, feeling a single person, a non-singer. An other-realm non-singer who felt nothing like any person he'd felt before in this world. So the fishhook told a true story, and this cold, dim reef housed people. He skimmed back along the edge, shifting from the ice to the land, exhilarated by the motion, and that's when it all fell apart. He felt an active focus, and then another, and like the dormant focus, these weren't like any he'd felt before. He lingered, knowing these were singers of a sort, but not exactly like him. Their foci were active, pulsing with life and energy, faster energy than foci from Portomare. One was stronger than the other, and the strong one shifted, emitting an unusual energy. When that energy touched his focus, his head ached. He felt like someone had dropped a house on him, pain crushing into his skull. He lost track of the notes, frantically reacting without thinking. He wasn't even sure what he played, but the result was that he stopped hurting, the world going dark and quiet around him.